Before I begin, I feel it is necessary to point out that the news arm of the BBC has yet to retract, apologize, or otherwise address the deeply transphobic reporting it has engaged in the last few months. In a pinned comment down below, you'll find my original video on the topic, several videos from the YouTuber Sean, who has been ongoing in his pursuit of trying to get the BBC to own up to what they have done, and also a video from Laura Kate Dale showing the protests that have taken place outside of the BBC offices. While I don't feel any of the people behind Doctor Who are in any way responsible for this, I cannot in good conscience talk about a BBC-owned property without mentioning this first, until such time as it is properly redressed. Thank you. Oh. Awkward pun title, unnecessary political commentary, oversimplified basic premise, must be arachnids in the UK. Oh boy, I was not looking forward to revisiting this. This was like, there were a number of things that I didn't really care for about Series 11, but this was the only episode I deeply, actively hated, even the first time I saw it. And I was not looking forward to coming back to it. Having now done so, I'm not going to say it's not as bad as I remember it being. What I'll say is, once you're prepped for what it is, it's slightly more tolerable. I found it less infuriating than I did the first time. Because part of what really infuriated me the first time was, while I didn't think Doctor Who in this particular series was really knocking it out of the park with every episode, or really hadn't blown me away with any of them, I still saw a lot of potential in the presentation, the characters, the way things were happening. And then this comes out of nowhere with this deeply lazy, basic sci-fi premise, the kind of thing that's been around since the earliest days of science fiction film, and this bungled political commentary, and I wasn't prepared for the ways in which this was bad. Because the ones up to this point, even when I hadn't totally clicked with them, I got what they were doing. I could get behind the idea of it, at least. I largely was having execution issues. This, I'm like, what are you doing? Why would you even do this? And now that I already know it's here, and it's not blindsiding me with its mere existence, there's some stuff that works, and the stuff that doesn't work isn't as painful because it's not unexpected. I think that was the thing. This was bad in ways I had not anticipated Doctor Who being bad, and it really blindsided me on first viewing. Second viewing, it's more tolerable. It's not really any better. There are a couple of bits here and there that kind of work. But let's get into it. Starting right at the front end, we've got a couple of things that I actually like, and then they kind of come unraveled later. I like that when Nadja shows up at the hotel a little ahead of when she's supposed to and runs into Jack Robinson, he just fires her. But what I like about that is the build up to that moment and his delivery of that line. He delivered "you're fired" the way you would expect a more standard Doctor Who or any kind of villain to say, kill her. And I like that, first of all, because it kind of gives the indication of where they're going in terms of depicting this as a businessman, that like, yeah, he's absolutely the villain, and we're going to portray him in the way we'd portray any villain, even if his words are "you're fired" instead of "kill her." But in addition to that, it makes him kind of pathetic. Like any decent villain would have killed her. You're just going to fire her. That's the best you've got, you pitiful, tiny little man. The problem is that kind of gets undone once the reveal happens that this is in fact Yaz's mother. And again, I'm feeling I'm seeing the hands of the author, and I'm feeling this sense of reverse engineering. I would bet you money that if Nadja was not Yaz's mother, she would have been killed. And the only reason they didn't, and thus resulted in a moment I liked, is because they weren't going to kill Yaz's mom. I don't know if that's actually true, but it's how it feels. They got a moment that I thought really worked, and then I realized, oh, you didn't do that on purpose. You stumbled into it because working backwards, you knew you couldn't kill her. Again, I can't prove that's the case, but it's what it feels like. And that, in and of itself, is a problem. Especially given that this continues to feed into what I brought up previously about needless cruelty. So in this case, we have Frankie, which is Jack's niece-in-law, I guess. Again, same pattern. Establish one theoretically relatable thing about this person and then kill them. The only difference between Frankie and every other dang time the show is doing this is that she doesn't die in the same scene. She dies in the second scene she appears in. Now, at this point, given that I am now seeing this pattern, and, with like the grandfather in The Woman Who Fell to Earth, I don't think this is an issue of, definitely not deliberate, bury your gays. It is, however, stumbling into that trope just by being so freaking callous. There is no point in Frankie, there's almost no point in Frankie existing as a character at all, but there's definitely no point in killing her this way. We have two deaths that we needed to establish the threat. We have the body that gets found in the apartment, which establishes the initial issue of these spiders are attacking and can kill people, and then the death of Kevin, which is Jack's bodyguard. That establishes that they are dangerous enough to take down someone who is armed and trained. Those are all necessary things to establish. Those two deaths serve a purpose. Frankie's serves none whatsoever. In theory, where she goes and ultimately ends up getting killed is it establishes like this secret basement with all the warning signs on it, but like they could have just come up to that. It would have worked fine not having seen it previously. And like only the audience has seen it previously. So like what difference does it make if we saw it earlier or just saw it for the first time later on when the actual characters who matter showed up to see it? Again, needless death, cruel death. Don't like it. Coming back to some of the stuff that worked a bit better, because we're going to deal with some stuff that really doesn't in a minute. But some of the stuff that did actually kind of work, and I hadn't really remembered, the interactions with the Doctor and the companions in terms of like her not wanting to leave and be on her own and them ultimately deciding to go with her. There's a couple of hiccups in there. Like I kind of wish that at the front end when they're initially saying their goodbyes that the Doctor was a little less incredibly on the nose and insanely readable as just being like, oh, I really wish you'd stay. Like, it's so super obvious. I kind of wish she had just been a little bit quiet because then it could have been just Yaz when she offered her to come to tea. And the Doctor's like, yes, please. It could have been Yaz reading her in a way the other characters weren't and seeing through her trying to be, oh no, I'm fine. But it read so clearly obvious that she wasn't fine that it doesn't come across as Yaz being insightful. It does come across as Yaz being kind and caring, and that's not nothing, but you could have established more about the character than you did just because of the way that that moment is played. That said, Yaz plays it pretty well. And I'll also say this. While I'm still not much of a shipper, and I've got my video out there on the whole Thasmin thing that, check that video out there. But especially based off this episode, I definitely get why it happened. Because you actually have Nadja, Yaz's mother, specifically saying,
are you two seeing each other?
So it gets suggested in the show, and there are some moments between them that are some looks that, okay, coming back to it now, because, like, again, since I don't like shipping in general, and I really don't like the Doctor in a romantic relationship, especially with a companion, I kind of deliberately put blinders on. I choose to not see that. But knowing that it eventually happens and coming back and looking at this now, I'm like, okay, yeah. Like, you could definitely see that moment and be like, there's starting to be feelings there, at the very least on Yaz's part. So, in hindsight, that stuff is starting to build towards that. Again, like, as I said in my video on that, not intentionally yet at this point, but like, I get where it came from. It didn't come out of nowhere. And I like that at the end, when the companions do finally choose to go with her, that like everybody has a reason that they're doing this. To my memory, like they just kind of went with her. That isn't really true though. And what's interesting is that all of the companions are kind of running away from something. Some more deliberately and obviously than others. Yaz is kind of escaping her family. Something we'll learn later she's done before. She's run away before. So that is sort of a laying in of that aspect of her character. Graham just flat out says, I'm not prepared to process Grace being gone on my own. And then Ryan is a bit more like, well, I just don't want to work in that warehouse. But given the stuff that is brought up earlier in this very episode about his dad, you can tell like he's kind of avoiding some pain too. So they do lay out the reasons for these companions to go with the doctor. I don't really think they laid out much of a reason for the doctor to gravitate towards them, other than they were just the first people she had any adventures with. But that's not no reason. It is a reason. I suppose theoretically, had they been anybody else, something similar likely would have happened, at least on her part, and wanting them to stick around. Just because previous doctors have had like very deliberate, ooh, you're intriguing and I want to find out more about you sort of things with a lot of their companions doesn't mean that is the only way to do it. This did a little different, and honestly, looking back on it, it's fine. I kind of both like but feel weird about the moment where the doctor is talking to, I forget her name, but the woman who was studying the spiders, who's trying to get to see her colleague in a room, and the doctor basically says like I could sort the lock if you're really worried about your friend. Part of me is like, I kind of like that she's waiting for permission instead of just barging in. But then another part of me is like, that really feels like a cop moment. You know, like when they're outside a door and like, we don't really have a reason to go in there. Unless somebody is fearful for the safety of anybody in there. You are? Okay. Like, accidental, I suspect, but there's something odd about a moment with the doctor feeling to me like an equivalent to something that happens with cops a lot. To me, the doctor shouldn't feel like a cop. So, like, I kind of like it as a moment, but it also makes me feel weird. Like I'm in an ambivalent place about that. But it stood out to me this time. But okay, let's get to what really doesn't work here, which is two main things. One is Jack Robinson as a character who is not as terrible as I remember him, but there's specific aspect of his character that like absolutely does not work. And then the incredibly confused morals and ethics of this episode. Let's start with Robinson. So in terms of him being a businessman and a lousy businessman, you know, a lousy human being doing shady business, dodging responsibility for it, I mean, that works. And like, it's very obvious that he is meant to evoke Trump. Between one of the first things he says being you're fired, the whole thing with hotels, him dodging responsibilities and being like, this is not my fault, and all these things, they build up to a Trump-esque character. And honestly, as much as it is kind of a little on the nose, ham-fisted political commentary, it was fine for what it was. I kind of still wish it wasn't there, but it was fine for what it was, because he definitely had enough signifiers to make you think of Trump, but also he was not doing a Trump impression and had a very different sort of personality and line delivery than Trump. So that, I'm not going to say that gave it distance, but that made him feel like a character, not a caricature. Until they bring up the idea that he has political aspirations, which after they do that, they immediately establish that Trump does exist and is in the White House. And so all of this makes no sense at all, because you're saying your Trump analog exists in the same world where Trump also exists. Like, then why are you using an analog? It makes the whole idea of even adding this element confusing. It makes his character and the idea and like his very notions of his political ambitions bizarre and strange and make no sense. Because like, he's got a moment, he has times where he says specific things that Trump was well noted for saying, things like fire and fury, and then later saying like, this is what people need, this is what's going to get me in the White House. Like, dude, if Trump is real and is president, that's already what's going to be in the White House. The reason Trump got in was the sense of him being disruptive to the normal flow of business. He was not the norm. But if he's in the Oval Office already, then he is now the norm. What is it that you think you're going to offer to voters that he already isn't? Like, yes, Robinson is pig-headed enough to think he's still something different to Trump, but like, it makes the whole political element like weird and confused, and I'm not sure toothless is the right word, but it just takes the wind out of the sails, because it's like, wait, you have somebody that is a copy of somebody in real life, but also that person in real life also exists in your fiction. Like, this is muddled. This is bizarre. And like, I know they had kind of already established that Trump was a thing because there was a reference to the orange president by Bill back in series 10, but like, that's like, you didn't have to draw this kind of attention to it. It makes it fall flat, something that already was only kind of working in the first place. But then we've got the insanely bizarre ethics going on because the doctor gets super uppity about Jack shooting the spiders. Except his initial stated intention to do so, and then his later act of doing so, comes after the doctor and companion's plan is already to kill the spiders.
We shut them in and isolate them.
You're going to let spiders use my panic room?
They deserve a humane, natural death.
Shooting's quicker.
Humanely, quote unquote, but like, you're already planning to kill them. And but you're getting on a moral high horse over the way this guy wants to kill them. And I'm not saying that like there's no moral difference between humanely putting down an animal and just shooting it. I'm not saying they are equivocal, but as a moral position for the doctor to get as uppity as she does, that is a bizarre bit of hair splitting. Because actually at no point is she trying to figure out how to keep these things alive and safe and relocate them or I don't know, something. That's never in the cards. The plan is always to kill them. And you just have a problem with the fact that he wants to do it with a gun. And there might be some way to make that not freaking bizarre and strange, but they don't do it. It's like the show is glommed onto the idea the doctor doesn't use guns and hasn't thought about why the doctor doesn't use guns. The doctor isn't really okay most of the time with things dying if they don't have to. And the fact that no other alternatives are even entertained is just, And like with the giant spider, it's already dying. It's suffocating. Then he comes in and shoots it. And he calls it a mercy killing. Now, granted, that wasn't on his mind when he shot it in the first place. He just shot it because he wanted to shoot it and feel like a big man. But, like, he's not wrong. Slow death by suffocation, that's not exactly a peaceful and humane way to die. So, what? It's the fact that the doctor gets on this moral high ground over it. On what basis? What moral high horse do you think you're sitting on? And it's not even necessarily bad ethics. Like, I've harped on Doctor Who for bad morals before. Like, when I go off on something like The Idiot's Lantern, which I think has horrific moral implications with its ending, that's not the case here. This isn't like, these are bad morals. Like, these are just confusing. These just don't make sense. It's a different problem, and it's one I'm more baffled by than infuriated by at this particular point. And coming back to Robinson real quick, I feel like I can use him and interactions with him as a couple more examples of things just being written really on the nose, because there are a number of exchanges with him where, again, if you were to bullet point the scene for me, here's what will get set, as an outline, like as a script outline. Here's the scene that's going to happen. Here are the points that are going to be said to Robinson. I would look at that and go, that's a solid scene. So, like, when they're in the mine, and if you diagram out the scene, they come in, they realize what's going on, the cause of it. Robinson and or his companies is behind most of it, and he is dodging responsibility for it, and they call him out on that. On paper, totally works. But the fact that a character literally just says to his face, and you're just avoiding responsibility, like, you just had someone say what the intention of the scene was. You didn't turn it into dialogue. You didn't turn it into an action. You just took the bullet point of what the scene is supposed to accomplish and just made it dialogue. And that is kind of happening repeatedly, especially when Chibnall himself is the one writing the scripts. The sense of what ideas are being communicated by these lines are fine, but they are just being said flat out. There's no, like, here's the line and here's the subtext. It's just like, the subtext is just the text. And that's just bad writing. I'm sorry, it just is. And like one other tiny thing that just stuck out to me. I kind of hate that Robinson mentions earlier on that he has a panic room. And then later the doctor's like, show me your panic room. I kind of wish like he hadn't brought it up earlier, but she just realizes he's the kind of jackass who would have a panic room that nobody else knows about. And she just says, show me your panic room, knowing that he has it. Again, it feels like that reverse engineering. Oh, we should establish why the doctor knows this. Why can't she just know? Why can't she just get a read on this guy and figure out what kind of asshole he is and call him on it? Again, it's the hand of the author. It's the reverse engineering thing. This episode's not good. Not quite as infuriating as the first time I saw it, but boy, it ain't good. Arachnids in the UK, what did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon's how I'm able to pay the bills. Like, share, and subscribe. Also help me out if you are able to do any of that. Don't worry too much about it, because what I really want you to know is that you're beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And credits. I got to shout out my top Patreon supporters, so thank you very much to Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, Oliver B., Melinda Walters, Leotha Boyd, TT, Bernobulax the Poodle, Eidolon, Tracy Scrabbit, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Angry Caspero, Adam Lefty Taylor, Shane Ross, Robin Moore, Shayla Gourlay, and Brendan LaRose. Couldn't do it without you.